to the Humans vs. Retirement podcast with financial planner and retirement specialist Dan Haylett. In this podcast, Dan explores ways to help you overcome the behavioural, emotional and financial challenges of life after work. Join Dan for the journey where he will explore how our wonderful human brain will naturally fight against what it takes to live a happy, healthy and wealthy retirement. Dan will draw on years of expertise, experience and expert guests to solve the behavioural, emotional and financial challenges of life after work. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Humans vs. Retirement podcast. I'm your host, Dan Haylett. Now today I'm thrilled to be having a conversation all the way from Canada with the amazing Dr. Moira Somers. Moira, welcome to the Humans vs. Retirement podcast.
Thank you. Sounds like a sumo wrestling match. I feel like we should...
It's the battle that we face. It is meant to be a bit of a, the battle that we as humans face with retirement. And actually, I couldn't think of anyone better positioned to have a conversation. Maybe we won't go too extreme as battles and sumo, but to have that conversation with Moira, because you know your work is truly outstanding. It's global. It's I've got a list of stuff here that I'd like to run through. Actually, you're the founder of Money, Mind and Meaning. You know, you're a psychologist, a neuroscientist. You're a family wealth consultant. You do a lot of coaching. Your specialist subject is in the kind of psychology of money. And I know you do a lot of work with the American Psychological Association. You lead the Financial Psychology Special Interest Group. And you're an international bestseller author with your brilliant book, Advice That Sticks. So as a true expertise in kind of neuroscience, financial psychology, mental health, and working with families, people, and advisors globally, I cannot wait for us to delve into this conversation. So, but that's obviously a wonderful resume, and as I said, firmly positioned in the eyes of many as one of the leading lights in our wonderful profession. But I'm really interested for you to share with the audience how you kind of got to where you got to, how you accumulated that wonderful resume. That would be amazing for you to share that.
Sure. My doctoral dissertation, my second doctoral dissertation, because the first one met a horrible demise in a traffic accident. And, I've had many years of therapy to overcome that now. So the second doctoral dissertation had to be done in a hurry. And what I ended up focusing on in that was procrastination, because I knew it would be inherently motivating. And what I didn't know at the time was how much that whole world, Dan, of what makes it hard for people to follow through with their own best intentions for their lives. And as I moved on and worked as a clinician and as a professor at a medical school, moving on into what makes it hard for people to follow other people's best advice for their lives, medical advice, fitness advice. That early research work became very foundational for the rest of my career. And at some point I got asked if I would bring the work around medical non-adherence into the financial domain. Because it turns out that many of the same factors that underlie what makes it so hard to follow through with what the doctors tell us also are at play with what makes it so hard for us to follow through with what financial professionals tell us. And so it's just been one of those wonderful evolutions of a career. Through working as a neuropsychologist, I worked with people with dementias and neurological conditions, many of them actually who had family enterprises and who had made no provision for their own incapacity, either temporary or permanent incapacity. So one of those other things, right? Like we all know we should do it and we don't. And so it's just been this wonderful dive at several points, doing deep dives into how do we as professionals get better, and how do we as just regular citizens get better at following through with the things that will make our life better, both now and in the future.
Such an amazing journey, Moira, to go from that the world of medicine and to kind of apply those, as you said, very similar principles and philosophies around what we do as financial planners in terms of how we act, but also how our clients, how medical professionals, patients then take on advice and act on that. There's so many similarities that we know. I'm interested. I'm curious. What do you? Is there the medical profession or the financial advice profession? What's worse? Are they both as bad as each other?
Oh boy. I don't want to start out with complaints. What I do know is that the financial professions, even to this day, in many jurisdictions, you don't need to have a single course in communication to practice. So historically, the financial professions have drawn from sales. And so they have lots of really good talkers, lots of really good persuaders. Maybe they haven't selected as well as they ought to have for high empathy, for high social and emotional intelligence. But that being said, I have just been so impressed with the reality of financial planners' lives, where they have the front row seat to so much of family life with their clients. Their financial advisors, for example, are often among the first to be told of a pending wedding or a birth. They're often the first to be told of a pending divorce. They are among the first people to be called if there's been a frightening diagnosis. They're with people through some really remarkable life transitions. And so I think that they're in this privileged position to do extraordinarily good work if they are willing to cultivate the personal skills.
And before I get into them, I'm also really curious to understand what, as humans, have you found that there is a clear winner or loser in how we receive advice from a medical professional about our health and a financial planning professional about our money? Is there, there's obviously correlation there, but are we more likely to follow, medical diagnosis and treatment, or money diagnosis and treatment?
Yeah, here's one of the problems for both fields, which is that the best advice in both medicine and finance is preventative advice. If that advice is followed, people will never know the heartache they've avoided, right? Or at least they have a much better chance of avoiding heartache if they follow sound principles in both domains, or poor outcomes. I mean, there's no guarantee. Luck plays a role, and genetics plays a role, and the economies play a role, and all that. But it turns out that the hardest advice to take is preventative advice.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what domain. We do best, we follow through when we have an immediate pain point, right? Boy, can you believe that I am motivated to swallow some pills when I have an abscessed tooth? You can also believe that I'm really inclined to slack off on the flossing as soon as that toothache is gone.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So those are some of the ways in which advice becomes easier or harder to follow, depending on the context, depending on what's immediately in front of our face. And frankly, depending on the skill of the advisor. One of the things that influences medical follow-through, for example, is can the physician make himself or herself be understood? How often do they resort to jargon? Do they ever stop to say, so give me your understanding of what you think I just said and why? And I think there's physicians learn about 13,000 new vocabulary terms in medical school. I wouldn't be surprised if financial advisors, especially those who deal with pure finance, I don't think they're that far behind. And it's so easy as an expert to let some of that professional terminology come into our interactions with people who have not a hot clue about what it is that you just said. The world of finance is intimidating to many, many people. And so they won't stop to say, huh? They'll just kind of smile and nod and go away, often feeling quite dispirited by the interaction. So, I've talked about what makes it hard for people to follow advice as though it's something ornery within the human spirit. And maybe we could argue that indeed there is. But there are also problems with advice givers. And my joy has always been figuring out how do we get better at delivering advice so that people can follow it. And that isn't just at the level of the individual practitioner. It's also at the level of the big systems, how much friction is in place? How many nudges are there to kind of guide us along and make it easier? So there are big systemic issues, and then there are very micro issues about, our relationship with money and how things are going in our marriage in terms of how well we can talk about it, and how things are going in our career. So it's a fascinating domain to be in simply because it is so broad.
Yeah, I think money is the lightning rod for kind of most emotional highs and lows, and I think we can kind of root it back to a lot of our feelings and emotions and happiness and sadness and arguments and joyful times is rooted, is often rooted back to money. And I speak to a lot of people, particularly in retirement, and we'll get onto this in a second, but one of the big things about spending money, if you kind of go too extreme, spending too much or not spending enough, is often deep rooted in learned or observed behavior when they were a child or growing up, and that kind of emotional impact that money has, I don't think is kind of as discussed as widely as what it should be. It's a problem with me, right? No, it's a problem with what you observed or what you learned, and that. So, yeah, it's fascinating. That's why we kind of turn up every day and try and do this thing and help people, because it is a fascinating subject and fascinating to help people along this journey. I'd love to kind of take this conversation off specifically around retirement, and I'm sure we're going to build on quite a bit that you just talked about, Moira. But so what do you believe in the work that you've done, both as a kind of practitioner and also with other financial advisors and planners globally, and everything that you've done? What do you believe are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities? We can maybe come on to that in a bit, but challenge, opportunity when it comes to this wonderful man-made thing that we've ended up calling retirement.
The overlap between money and well-being and physical health is, it's almost complete.
Yeah.
And so people who have taken care of themselves in multiple domains typically are ready to face retirement they're just in better shape, and people who haven't are not. And so again, since the best advice is preventative advice, that is one of the challenges of preparing for retirement, is can you make that connection to your future self? Indeed, do you even have a sense of future? You and I just had a little preamble about how much of our respective continents are on fire right now. And I know that is with the millennials and the Gen Zs that I work for, it's really affecting their ability to even locate a future for themselves. For those who are, closer to that point right now, retirement, it's one of those big life transitions, and transitions are different from just ordinary lower order of magnitude life changes, because in transition events, fundamental aspects of our identity change, right? When you go from being married to divorced, or without children to having children, those are sea changes in how you view yourself and how others view you in your activities of daily life. And the transition into retirement is that kind of order of magnitude different for many, many people, especially if all they're conceiving it as is abrupt discontinuation of what it was that they were doing without the beginnings of a new vision that they've actually had some time to test drive at least certain components of it. So the huge amount of uncertainty, the big change in identity that they usher in, and the fact that sometimes people just haven't planned adequately for it, those are the big challenges I see.
And I've spoken a lot on this podcast in from different angles, actually, about the identity shift.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what's really interesting from what you've said is that actually what that identity shift does is bring probably more uncertainty than we've ever had when it comes to who we are as individuals and what we stand for, and and what we do. I'm interested just to kind of go on a little bit about uncertainty. What's your observations about how we can maybe become more comfortable with uncertainty? Because I think, as human beings, we love certainty. So we love going, right, this is, A plus B equals C, and this is we want to go in a straight line. But, we need to become really uncomfortable with uncertainty, particularly in those transitional moments, as you said, and particularly in retirement. What's your observations around trying to help become more comfortable with uncertainty?
As you were talking, I was thinking about some of the research on resilience, Dan. And it turns out that resilience is not this fixed personality trait. It's actually something that waxes and wanes in response to what people do. And one of the really interesting things that people do, that people who are almost like viewed by many, many other people as exemplars of resilience, one of the interesting things that they do differently is they just expose themselves to new stuff at a much higher frequency than the rest of us do. And it's at a micro level in some ways. Like, they take different routes home. They will pick up foods they've never tried at the grocery store. They say yes to things that just at a much higher frequency than other people do. And so it's like it's constantly exercising their ability to handle uncertainty, but it's doing it at manageable levels. And that seems to be one of the tricks, is that if you can make it manageable and if you can make it joyful in the process, or at the very least interesting. If nothing else, I'll get a good story out of my, journey with the durian fruit in the grocery market that looks like some medieval weapon and smells like dirty socks. I'll at least get a good story out of this. Brains thrive on novelty, and they literally shrink with uniform, repeated, unaltering experiences. So we can cultivate the ability to get better and better at uncertainty. And having watched my mom, navigate the last quarter of her life, and now my mother-in-law, what I became really aware of was just how much change there is in that last quarter. I mean, you move more in your 70s and 80s than at any other time in your life, probably than your 20s, other than your 20s. your social network changes, your geography changes, your body is changing. There's so much change. So my advice and my current practice even is to be opening up to novelty in as many ways as I can without being ridiculous or getting overwhelmed.
Yeah.
It's not that there's anything wrong with doing things that you've always done, right? If you love doing a Sudoku, if you love golf, if you love that TV show, nothing wrong with it. There's a lot to be said for happiness, but we can't pretend that those things actually help our brain stave off decline. So looking for opportunities to keep our brains, I almost want to use the word supple, but firing in new and interesting ways. That's the challenge.
There's a couple of things that have just really struck me as you've been talking about people that I've worked with for a number of years and people that I'm starting to work with now. And I think the biggest, the people that have the most challenge are ones that have had worked at the same place for 35 years. And they've almost done a very same, job for the last 10, 15. This thing about being curious and open and trying new things, I think people that have carved out a really specific identity and have had that identity for 20 plus years, that are very routine based. And again, nothing wrong with this as such, but very routine based, probably do struggle the most when it comes to thinking about planning for and executing that retirement transition, because because maybe, they haven't had the open-mindedness to explore, and they're not that kind of person or haven't kind of made themselves that kind of person. I just think it's really fascinating. I think it's the curious mind stuff, isn't it? I think if you're curious and you try new stuff, and as you say, micro actions are really important. I think a lot of people feel that this has to be kind of big time sea change decisions or big time sea change choices, but actually it doesn't have to be anywhere near that, does it?
It doesn't. It just needs to be these repeated little things that put you in a mildly, in this zone where you just don't necessarily know if you'll like it or not, but you're open to finding out. Or you're open, even if you think you really won't like it, but your partner's been bugging you to take ballroom dancing for years and you're really grumpy about it, but you'll do it because you're willing to bring joy to your partner. Finding your why for doing the thing that pushes you out of the comfort zone is part of what allows people to shift into gear like that. There's, when I think about what represents a good day for me, it's, sitting or lying in my hammock with a book. The thought of retirement, could it look like that? I need to just give myself a slap, because that is exactly the kind of thing that will invite the decline that I'm not interested in. And so you have to find the balance between the things that bring joy and comfort and the things that push us. And sometimes financial resources absolutely assist in that. I work with a personal trainer. It's not because I can't count to 8 on my own. It's because she makes me do stuff that is really uncomfortable, frankly, ridiculous sometimes. And she makes it fun. And it's stuff that I would never do on my own. And I see that I'm stronger for it. So that is one of the advantages of having a little bit of disposable income, that I can hire a personal trainer. But you can think about, all of us. What are the things that we're willing to invest in? in retirement and pre-retirement that really will set us up for success. And it turns out there are some, I'm sure you've done podcasts before on money and happiness, but there are also, and there's some really strong evidence-based things about that. Turns out there's also some really strong things about how to spend your money pre-retirement and retirement in such a way that safeguards you and staves off decline as long as possible. So obviously I'm a big fan of those things too.
Yeah. I want to come back to, I'm going to come back to this kind of decline element in a second. I think it's a really important subject that I want to spend some time with you on, because you've done work in this area and you've got some amazing thoughts around it. But I just want to kind of grab your thoughts on something. I think that, following on from, curious mind or and opening up to kind of new things and thinking about how we can take those micro actions, I do think retirement is the gift of time and freedom. And, if it's planned right, there is an opportunity there to, as you said, if you build that vision, I think you have time and probably mental capacity, because you're not having to worry on a Sunday evening about the week ahead or things like that, to actually probably sit down and think about those new things. And I've come across people and worked with people that have simply said something along the lines of, look, I've always wanted to explore, but I've never let it enter my head because I've never had the time, because I just work all these hours. And I think that's a really important, I'd love to get your thoughts on it, because I think it's really important to go, well, that's cool, but you've now got, you're going to have the gift of time. So some pre-planning to be able to do those things, let the mind wander, be free, dream big. What are these things that you want to do? And I think retirement, I've mentioned this to someone the other day, a client, I think you've probably got, it's almost like childhood again. The gift of freedom that you get as a child before you have to get to secondary school or go to university and then be a grown up and get a job. You almost get that sense, potentially that sense of freedom again in retirement, to explore and think freely. Is that something that you kind of concur with, or got any thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. People vary hugely in their openness to experience. And so for some people, the thought of everything or the daily routine that they've known for years now coming to an end, for them, that doesn't feel like freedom at all. It feels vaguely horrifying. Our purpose, our deepest joy, it doesn't appear before us like, Moses in the burning bush, right? It's not like Moses was a special case and he got written up. Moses' brother Bernie is more like, the guy we never heard about. That's kind of who we are. And we're left to kind of figure out our best path on our own. And how is it that becomes apparent to us? For me, part of it is, can you follow the joy? Can you turn and pay attention to this thing that's kind of been tickling the edge of consciousness for years, but you kept swatting it away like a nuisance mosquito because you couldn't, as you said, you didn't have the time. But if you stop the swat and actually orient to it, what does it have to say to you? What are the things that move your heart? What are the things, what problems would you like to dedicate time to, money to? There's different ways that the essential self says yes, and other ways that it says no. Ways that it, sometimes rather than, if we haven't learned how to pay attention to the yes, sometimes my experience as a therapist is that the essential self has no alternative but to start saying no. And it says no through things like stuff that you used to find incredibly interesting or important now leaves you completely flat, or you're just getting so grumpy about it you can't even be socially appropriate in the meetings, right? You're falling asleep. You're just getting grumpy with everything. sometimes it says no by just giving you physical symptoms. You start feeling ill when you do that. And so this willingness to just tune into your own experience and start paying attention to neglected aspects of yourself, to overused aspects of yourself, and to be open to what wants to emerge for you. There are some really good resources that I think help us pay attention to that instead of swatting it away or trying not to listen because it's inconvenient or somebody else might not approve, or other people might have designs on your time and energy and money. But this is, retirement is that time where you can just really say, what do I believe about my own happiness, about my own purpose, and ask those questions in ways that perhaps you haven't been able to in a long time.
I 100% agree. I think it's and I don't think people give themselves enough kind of grace period to think of that. It's almost kind of, I need to focus on this thing I'm retiring from, and that's my focus. It's the thing I'm coming from. Get rid of that, and then I'll go to the thing I'm going to. And actually, quite a lot of occasions, you're almost a bit too late then, right? It's kind of, you need to be able to start to think about some of these things. What you're retiring to is as important what you're retiring from. And we should be thinking of both of those things in the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years of kind of thinking about our end of our career or our full-time working life. And again, it doesn't mean that we stop work. It just means that we might be financially independent to a point that when we do choose to pull back the duvet and get up and go do something, it's aligned with our values. It might be work and we might get paid for it, which is cool. But I think that you mentioned it, that cliff edge approach where people go, right, I'm done on the Friday night, and on the Monday I'm twiddling my thumbs and I have no idea what it means, because all I focused on is getting away from the thing over here. So I think this, the best retirements I've seen are ones that have been 2, 3, 4 years in the making, with some soul searching, some, communicating with family and wives and husbands and partners, and making sure that, this is a proper thing. It's not just something done on the fly, or something that was kind of made a decision with a week's notice.
Yeah, and I think the best retirements are also the ones that have been where you can kind of incrementally test drive some of your thoughts.
Yeah, I love that.
Maybe moving to that golf community is, it sounds like heaven, but boy, does it fall flat after a little while. So the ability to kind of experiment, to check things out, to move incrementally into these things rather than the all or nothing approach, that can be super useful, Dan. Retirement is one of those transitions that has 4 stages for most of us. Some transitions only have 3 stages. They have ending, right? Like whatever it was you knew before, that's come to an end. And then there's this passage phase, which can be kind of wild and woolly. And then there's the new normal. But some transitions, in addition to ending, passage, new normal, they've got this early stage, this precursor one of anticipation. And retirement for most of us is that, includes that 4th stage. And in that, you can begin to do some really important work that isn't just about the math, and it isn't just about the theoretically what sounds really good. It's actually experience gathering, and being able to
practical stuff,
perform
right?
almost these, just little experiments about, gee, I thought I might like to live closer to my kids. What does that actually look like? Are they any easier to live with now or live near now than they were when they were 15? Do they actually have room for me in their life? One of the things that you can start cultivating in anticipation of retirement is the ability to have more courageous conversations than you've ever had before. And I think financial planners can help lead that, courageous conversations about what matters to you about money, what matters to you about work, about relationships, about family, about health. That is also part of the anticipation phase. It's to build up these skills for having more honest disclosures, in some ways more vulnerable disclosures, sometimes tough conversations. That's one of the unsung skills of retirement in my view, is being able to just lean into some of the stuff that you may have avoided for a long time.
Yeah, I had a wonderful conversation in season 1 of the podcast with Ashley Kwame, who does a lot of work on relationship, about how we need to communicate. It's a vital period to communicate with our spouse, partner, wife, husband, and courage. And children, yeah, absolutely. And again, like you said, this is probably subjects that you've avoided for years, and you need to kind of be courageous in this, because now you need to be open and honest about money. And a lot of people that I work with who have been married for a number of years have not been open and honest about, money and what they want to do with it. So I think building that shared vision is vital in conjunction with building your own vision about what that looks like. Mm-hmm. Moira, I'd love to. There's a couple of things I want to talk with you about before we wrap up. One of them, I want to take you back to your neuroscience days, and you still kind of live in that world, so obviously, but and you've mentioned several times about preventative measures around decline, and particularly cognitive decline, and I think one of the biggest fears that I see with people I work with is dementia and Alzheimer's, because it seems to be on the rise a lot in their parents. So I've got so many clients that their parents have it or have just been diagnosed with it, and seeing their parents go through that decline and being part of their life as they go through that, I think is obviously a really challenging time, and I think it often maybe prevents people from making that retirement decision, because I don't know what to do with my life, and I know that I need to kind of keep active. But I'm really interested in your thoughts about cognitive decline, and and you've already touched on this a little bit, but how we can think about making sure that we do everything we can and everything we can control about living a long, healthy life in retirement, particularly when it comes to our brains and keeping those sharp and healthy.
Some of this is just so non-sexy and not new. I don't want to put your audience to sleep, but it's stuff like get your blood pressure under control, markedly reduce alcohol intake from what was recommended from previous levels to now. There's evidence that very minimal alcohol intake is really the best advice for people. But if there's one thing that, if I had my wish, I would be herding the entire population of 60-year-olds into hearing clinics and getting people to assess hearing on a regular basis, beginning no later than age 60, earlier if possible, and then doing it thereafter every couple of years, and intervening early in hearing loss, learning how to tolerate hearing aids while your hearing loss is minimal, because what makes most older people put their hearing aids in the drawer is that by the time the loss is diagnosed and they're given the hearing aids, it's just freaking annoying to hear all the stuff that you've grown accustomed to not hearing anymore. And it turns out that when you're not hearing, your brain is just being shuffled off to Buffalo to do this slow decline. And that happens because of a variety of things. One of which, not only are you not getting input that you need to stay lit up internally, but you are increasingly getting shut out of the social compact. If there's one best predictor of aging well, it's staying socially connected. And if you can't hear, not only can you not stay up with what's going on around you, but you become increasingly irrelevant. You're like that, car that sort of broke down on the side of the highway, and at first traffic backs up around you, but then eventually you get pulled off to the side and traffic keeps going. And if that sounds harsh or bleak, I'm sorry, but really that's what happens to people who do not pay attention to that part of their aging. So if we can get people to get early diagnosed and to intervene early in hearing loss, that would make me so happy, because it just prevents unnecessary decline hugely. So, following my own medicine, I went and, just a couple months ago, because I had put it in my calendar several years ago, okay, this month, this year, you're getting it done. And now it's on the calendar for this month, 2 years from now, because it's so easy to minimize. And that is a fatal mistake, to minimize.
It's just such amazing practical advice, Moira. I think, newsflash, every person I know that has been lucky enough to get into their 80s doesn't hear as well as someone in their 50s, right? So, it happens, right? It's going to happen. If you're lucky enough to kind of go into your 60s and your 70s, there is a natural decline of hearing ability. I just think it's such an amazing thing that I've never thought of, that could be so easy to do. Part of your plan is to, make sure that you get regular checkups for hearing and other things as well, right? So, but that, and it's interesting. I did read the 85-year-old Harvard study that looks at, the number one predictor for a happy retirement is social connections, and as you said, if you're not socially connected, then you are factually taking away or having a big impact on what one of the biggest things for your happiness could be. So let's start a campaign.
Yeah, I think about that particularly with respect to young people. Most people in retirement, they've got a dream of spending time with grandchildren or nurturing relationships with great nieces and great nephews. And if you can't hear them when they are telling you something vulnerable, when they are sad, if you're not there, if you can't pick up on subtle cues and variation and voice tone, it just makes it harder for you to be that go-to person in their life. So whatever the why is that would lead you to do this, lean into it and get it done, and spend money that you have set aside for things that will allow you to intervene early in sensory loss of any kind. Whether that, I've harped on about hearing loss now, but here's another sensory loss that affects most elderly people. It's vestibular functioning. We fall because our vestibular receptors don't get the workout that they do. Most trips and falls in elderly people are because they've lost ankle mobility. Just that ability to, right now, Dan, stick your heels on your floor and lift up your toes. And as we get older, that is something that we lose flexibility in. And so we catch on the edge of carpets, we catch on the edge of stairs, cracks on sidewalks, and we go head over heels. But it turns out that there's also all kinds of vestibular receptors in our ankles. There are vestibular receptors in our neck, our ears, our bottoms. And if we start becoming inflexible, because we're sitting in that hammock reading that book, then we are more likely to experience falls or tumbles, or we just can't recover quickly. Recovering, investing money in canes and walkers, that kind of sensory loss is really important. Just so many areas that if for whatever reasons you may have neglected your body in your pre-retirement years, one of the things that I strongly recommend that people do is put their body on the agenda in the retirement years. Everything else kind of hinges on the intactness of brain and body.
Yeah, if you're either not here or not well enough, either mentally or physically, to spend your money and time on what's important to you, then what's the point? And I think I'm seeing increasingly, an increasing appetite for people when we build, retirement plans. There are, we're starting to build a lot more kind of health funds and points where, that they want to ensure that there is money available to be able to go and get things done, tested, or new hips, or, they don't want to wait on, they don't want to wait the NHS over here, and, they don't want to wait in line. They just want to go and pay to get this thing done so they can continue to live the life that they want to live. And I think there's an increasing appetite from people to allocate money specifically to these things, so they know that they can put their time at best use, which I think's a wonderful thing. But often, like we said, earlier on, it's not the big things. It doesn't have to be a hip operation. It can be a hearing test, right? It can be the simple things that we know that can help this. And wonderful tips. As we wrap up, I've got some questions I'd love to ask you, if that's all right, just to kind of get your take on a couple of things. You've mentioned this a couple of times, and I don't think it's going to be in the hammock reading a book, but what will Moira's retirement look like going forward?
I do not want to retire. I
Correct
love
answer.
my work. I love the variability of what I do, and I've been so lucky in that that I've been able to create this career that just offers me so much variability. In part, it's because I haven't chased the dollar. If I could focus, I'd be way wealthier. But I just love variety so much, and the capacity to be self-directed. And so I don't really at this point see retirement as a goal, although I know that at some point that can change. And so I'm trying to be open to that. In part because my husband wants to retire. He wants to be doing, he's a pilot, and I don't know whether you've noticed, but traveling isn't really as much fun as it used to be. Turns out it's not as much fun for the pilots either. If you think,
right,
3 delays at the airport per year is miserable for you, you can imagine what it's like for them. So he would like to retire, and he would like to be doing volunteer work in disaster areas, rebuilding stuff. And so I've been challenging myself to be increasingly paperless and digital in the work that I do, so that I can join anywhere for any period of time. I am, as I mentioned earlier, pushing myself to be fitter than I have ever been in my life. I am doing those ankle exercises. I
No
am
tripping
working
over.
out with the
No
personal
tripping over.
trainer. I'm not tripping over. I've got my hearing tested.
Yeah.
And I am pushing myself to do new things that are pleasing, not just, new things for the sake of newness, but I'm not just, I've always wanted to be a good harp player. And so I have signed up to do more with harp than I've ever done before. I've joined new organizations that are doing work that sometimes baffles me and sometimes makes me really uncomfortable. But I just want to make sure that I am evolving for whatever it is that the world is evolving into. So retirement is going to be a slow burn for me, I think, but I hope it looks happy and healthy and varied, because that's what's mattered to me pre-retirement.
It's that saying, I don't know who said it. You might know who said it, but design a life that you never want to retire from, right? I think that's kind of that's the thing. So if I'm sitting across from you, we're either having a chat on a professional sense, or we've gone out as friends over lunch, and I'm sitting there, and we both know that I've got enough money for the retirement that I desire. What would you be saying to me is your number one tip for a happy, healthy, and wealthy retirement?
Remaining part of the social compact, remaining socially engaged. And what that means, if you take, let's say that your runway in retirement is 30 years. I'm just going to pull that out of the air. Then making sure that you cultivate relationships with people from younger generations, that you, not just family members, but people from different organizations. Look around and look at what the median age is of the places that you currently hang out, or the volunteer commitments that you currently have. Are they likely to be around in 30 years? If the answer to that is no, then start thinking about how you can either recruit younger people to join you in this, or find out where else are people going. But if you look at the blue zones on Earth, those 5 or 6 countries on Earth where people live well and healthy and long into retirement, the first bunch of research into those people was all around their physical lifestyle habits. What did they eat? Okay, so Mediterranean diet, blah, blah. But then they started going a little deeper, and it turns out that another huge differentiator of blue zone countries is that retirees remain vital to the functioning of the families and the community. They're not shuffled off to some retirement home where they play shuffleboard, and everything is done for them. Like, run screaming from those ads, Dan. You do not want everything done for you. Maybe a week around a pool in Mexico, okay. But you do not want that for the rest of your life. You want a place that says, your skills are needed here. Your contribution is needed here. That's what you want in retirement.
And with that in mind, I suppose the last question really I'd love to ask is what do you think is, the biggest opportunity when it comes to this newfound time and freedom that we have in retirement?
I think that's just highly, highly variable from one person to the next. But being able to deliberately craft some of this transition experience, to be deliberate about it, to dare to believe that what wants to emerge from you is the same thing that the world needs to have emerging from you. That this place where Frederick Buechner talks about vocation as being this place where your deepest joy meets up with the world's greatest needs. And that when that happens, that there's just this atomic energy kind of fusion that can emerge. And so to be thinking deeply about what matters to you now, that's not a selfish question. That's a vital question. The planet needs you. Odds are high that your family needs you. Some family needs you out there. And so to really be tuning into how do you want to show up in the face of the joy and the opportunities that this world gives us.
Moira, that is such a wonderful place, I think, to end this amazing conversation. And I really do want to thank you for your time and energy and wisdom and knowledge, because I think it's just been such an amazing conversation full of practical tips and practical ways to start thinking about this. So thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you.
It's been a joy. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you with me today. Until next time, take care.
Thank you for listening to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. Subscribe to be notified when new episodes become available. We would love to have you along for the journey. If you like what you heard, then we would appreciate you taking a few minutes to leave us a review. And lastly, if you want to explore your retirement plans further, download our free 7-step retirement GPS toolkit linked in the show notes. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of TFP or Dan Haylett. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, so please always seek the advice of professionals with any questions you may have regarding your retirement.